What is up, guys? In today's video, we're going to be going over several mistakes that you might be making in Fortnite Reload. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you like to see more, and comment down below which of these mistakes you've been making most in Fortnite Reload, or something that I didn't talk about in the video that you think is a common mistake. The first one is going to be using the lever shotgun, and this is, kind of a joke just as the first one. But in reality, like, using the lever shotgun is a mistake in Fortnite Reload. I really do not enjoy this weapon. At the start, I was just kind of taking my shotgun based on rarity. But as of now, unless it's like a huge rarity difference, I'm not using the lever shotgun. Like, I would take a green pump over a gold lever. If I end up with like a white tack or a purple lever, I might end up using the purple lever. But in general, I feel like the pump, the tack, and even the heavy shotgun are just significantly better than the lever shotgun. And pretty much any time I've used the lever shotgun, I've been disappointed by it. So I would recommend not using it. The next is going to be that a lot of players and a lot of teams, from what I've seen, get really hard-headed and they refuse to give up on early game fights and just kind of reset and land somewhere else. Because the way Fortnite Reload works is that if you have any teammates alive, you get to come back. And so a lot of times, if you're landing at a populated POI like Tilted Towers, Retail Row, or Pleasant Park, you can get in situations where you and the enemy team are just fighting for like the first 10 minutes of the game. And what ends up happening is y'all both just kind of cannibalize each other's loot and cannibalize each other's timing in the game, to the point where a team that landed at a different POI eventually just pulls up and has much better loot, more mobility, more heals, all of this stuff. And it makes it easier for them to just like clean up the fight. So if you feel like you're engaged in these early game fights where it's just kind of a stalemate, neither team is really getting an advantage, I would recommend eventually probably just leaving the area or landing somewhere else, especially when supply drops start spawning in, which we'll get to later on in the game. So I think just being hard-headed and refusing to kind of reset and accept that, like, okay, we're just going to give up this POI and go somewhere else, eventually leads to a point where you just lose anyways. Also, not checking where zone is early on in the game can also affect this as well, because the first zone will spawn relatively early in the game, and this is what cuts off like a decent chunk of the map. So if you land Pleasant Park and it turns out that Pleasant Park isn't even in first zone, you might want to leave there a bit earlier. I've had a few games where like I didn't even realize storm was coming yet and we're already in the storm. So I would recommend trying to check that somewhat early on if possible. I know these games can be really chaotic. If you go tilted, you're pretty much never going to have to worry about zone. But if you go to any of the populated POIs on the edge, like Retail or Pleasant, you may need to worry about zone somewhat early on in the game. Another mistake that I see a lot of people making, which kind of comes from regular BR mode, I think, is that they finish kills too early and then they don't respawn when they should. So for finishing kills too early, the reason why this is a mistake is because, like I've already touched on, the whole point of the game mode is that if a team has a player alive, the other players will respawn when they're eliminated. There's like a timer that starts when the player is eliminated, and then if one of their teammates is alive when that timer gets to 0, they'll come back. And so if you knock somebody and then immediately finish them, you're just starting their respawn timer earlier, and then you might end up in a world where like you're eliminating their teammate as the first person you eliminated respawns, and then you just are continuing to have this fight with the same team. If you just want to farm as much kills as possible, then you do want to eliminate people, let their teammate live, and then just keep cycling the kills that way. But if you just want to like win the match, knowing when to finish knocks and when not to, I think is pretty important, especially in duos. This isn't as big of a deal in squads, like it somewhat is because you have several teammates. But in duos, especially early game, the respawn timers are incredibly fast. It might be like 5 seconds that their teammate have to live after you eliminate them before they come back. So just kind of keep this in mind. If the teammate isn't going to be able to revive them, leaving them knocked is actually better off for you, because you might end up in a world where like you eliminate their teammate, they were knocked for like 12 seconds, 15 seconds, whatever. And so they would have ended up coming back anyways. And then this is also true with you respawning when you're knocked, because like I already said, the timers in duos are incredibly fast. So if you don't think your teammate is going to be able to revive you in that time, you're better off respawning rather than waiting like 34, like I don't know how long the bleed out timer is from full HP. Let's just say you wait 20 seconds when knocked. It probably would have been better for you just to respawn and then come back if you like earlier than when you still would have been knocked anyway. So I think identifying, you know, when your teammate is and isn't going to be able to revive you and then starting your countdown timer sooner is actually better in the long run. This doesn't just mean you should immediately bleed out every time you get knocked, but just you have to assess the situation and kind of know when finishing knocks is appropriate and when bleeding out is appropriate for you. Another mistake that is going to play into this because of the whole respawn nature of the game is if you're last alive and you have like 15 seconds until one of your teammates comes back, you can reduce their timer by getting some knocks or getting some eliminations. But I think forcing fights when you're the last one alive is a pretty big mistake, especially if you're about to have a teammate come back anyways. If you want to like hop on a team and your teammate has like 4 seconds before they come back, you might as well wait for that respawn timer for them to come back and then maybe start your fight if that's something you want to do. There will be times where you don't get to choose this, like there's other people fighting you and then you got to defend yourself. It is what it is. But I'm just saying you shouldn't go out of your way to force fights when you're the only one alive, because if you're eliminated before your teammates come back, y'all are out of the game. It's GG's. So that is another important skill to develop in this game mode, knowing when to play your life and knowing when to fight when your teammates are waiting on the respawn. And that's a lot of everything I just talked about is like very different from BR because it all centers around like the respawn mechanic in this game mode. Another mistake that I personally was making early on is that I was ignoring crash pads because I really don't think of them as that great of a mobility item. And I still would rather have shockwaves or a grappler over crash pads, but crash pads are very good and they're very easy to activate and you get a lot of mobility for just one, because if you sprint and deploy it, you go pretty far. So you could deploy the crash pad by hitting your jump button twice. And if you do this while sprinting, you'll get the sprint effect from the crash pad and you'll go pretty far. You can also just sprint into a teammate's or an enemy's crash pad and you'll go pretty far as well. So one of the nice things about crash pads is I feel like they're relatively common. And you can move the whole team with it, which is actually pretty beneficial. I think in squads, having somebody carry this is quite good. Like I already said, though, I would rather have shockwaves or a grappler, but if I have to choose between a grappler with like 3 uses or 6 crash pads or like 2 shockwaves and 6 crash pads, I think having the 6 crash pads is actually better, but like some people wouldn't consider that. And then a nice positive of this, with them being less popular amongst players, is if you're playing team game modes, like your teammates will probably just give you the crash pads for free. You don't even have to argue about it, you know what I mean? Whereas like shockwaves, they might want to share. Huge change between the current battle royale and Reload is the loot pool and the way the weapons work, because as of right now we have mostly third-person Bloom assault rifles, and the way Bloom works is your crosshair expands as you shoot the weapon or as you're moving. The crosshair gets larger and then the bullets can go anywhere within the crosshair. So if your opponent is rather far away and you're just full spraying, you're really not likely to hit many shots. If they're close to you, their character model is going to appear larger to you, so you're going to be able to fill more of your crosshair with your opponent. And in that case, full spraying will work a little bit better. But just in general, you need to manage the size of your crosshair and manage your bloom based on how far away the opponent is, because how far away they are will affect how large they are to you. So very long range, probably need a tap fire or burst, or just not even fight at really long range. If I have someone that's incredibly weak running from me, then maybe I will try to tap fire them, you know? But if a fight hasn't broke out yet and someone's like 200 meters away, I'm really not going to be trying to AR them. I'd rather try to like get closer before having that fight, you know? But just in short, in close range, you can full spray. Medium to long range, you're probably going to need to tap fire. The hammer AR does have way less bloom than the other AR options, so if you just want to full spray all the time and not really think about it, the hammer AR is probably going to be the best choice for you. And personally, it's my favorite AR in the loot pool in Reload currently. I think another huge mistake that some of you probably made early on, but I would imagine this gets like, you stop doing this as you play the game mode, is not having somebody on your team or yourself carry bunkers or shield bubbles. Bunkers are preferred though, or bushes, but like I think bunkers are the top tier cover item because it's more permanent. But just anyways, like bunkers are huge in this game mode. So I think you always want to either have them or have somebody on your team carrying them 100% of the time if possible. So just kind of talk about this with your teammates when you're playing, or just if no one else is going to do it, you do it yourself. Because if two teams are fighting and one team has bunkers and the other doesn't, I would bet a significant chance that that bunker team is going to win that fight. It just gives you immediate cover anywhere you are, and especially in game, this is going to be very important. And if you are just traveling around the map, I think it's best to just walk around with your bunkers out. That way, the moment you get shot, you can deploy the bunker. Obviously, this is a zero build thing. Most of my channel covers zero build. So if you're a builds player watching my channel for the first time, that's why I'm covering this. But yeah, in zero build, I think having the bunkers is huge for reload mode. In general, reload mode plays out in a much faster pace than BR, I would say. Just the moment-to-moment fighting there's a lot of it, and things are always changing with how small the map is and with people always coming back and stuff. So I think not being decisive is another huge mistake. I think being decisive is good for BR as well, but it's more necessary in reload because of how fast-paced the game is. So I think you need to be more decisive with what you're going to do in this game mode because it plays out so fast. You do need to play at the pace of your team though, and this is one thing I've seen a lot of people struggle with based on reading comments, especially those playing with Phil, is that people don't want to play at the pace of their team, or their team doesn't play at the pace of them. If your team is playing pretty slow and you're just rushing squads on your own fighting 1v4, sure, your team is playing slow, but that's also kind of on you for rushing a team by yourself. And the inverse of this is very true as well. If your team is playing fast and you're always the one lagging behind, you probably need to try to play a bit faster. This goes for all team game modes, but I think the margin for error in reload is a bit smaller because of how chaotic it is and how much more fast-paced it is. I think also you need to know when you have to be selfish and let your teammates die so you can get away and regain. Let's say, for example, you are the one who just happens to be a bit slower in this situation, and two of your teammates have gotten knocked. One teammate is weak, and your team hasn't really gotten any significant damage or knocks on the other team. You can jump in that fight and maybe contribute, maybe you get a knock or two, but odds are your team is losing that fight because you're already in such a bad circumstance. So cutting your losses and just kind of leaving that situation before you get too deep and letting your teammates actually respawn and regain in the match, I think is huge. This was also true in rebirth mode of Warzone, but just in short, know when to cut your losses and play your life. That way your teammates can come back to life and respawn. I think not landing with your team is another huge problem in this game mode, based on reading comments again of people playing with randoms and saying, I go retail, my teammates go tilted. If your teammates are landing tilted, try to land tilted with them. It's probably not the best chance to win the game because it's a very chaotic POI, but it's probably a better chance than both of y'all landing at completely different POIs. So try to land with your teammates. And if you're landing at a POI, I think it's important to try to land close to your teammates as well. In the past, like Retail Row, for example, or Pleasant Park, sharing a house would often be bad because there wasn't very much loot and the 100% chest spawn rate wasn't a thing. But reload mode has 100% chest spawn rate and just a lot of loot added to these POIs and to these houses. So if your teammates, if you're playing duos and you're landing retail and there's a lot of teams there, I think landing at the same house together isn't as big of a problem as it would have been with the original version of retail and the original loot spawn rate. So just keep that in mind. Not only should you land at the same POI as your teammates, but try to land close enough to them that you're able to help in fights or get help when you're fighting. And this may end up just meaning land at the same house as your teammate, but it's not as big of a problem as it would have been in the past because there is more loot. Supply drops are also huge in this game mode. I've seen a lot of people comment about how it's impossible for them to get any decent loot. I think supply drops are huge for this. I think you get 2 weapons, you get utility, you get heals, maybe mobility guaranteed. I don't know. It seems like every time I open a supply drop, there's just so much stuff. And so if you've run out of mobility, if you've run out of heals, if you don't have bunkers yet, supply drops are definitely going to be the play. And then you also have a chance at getting pretty decent weapons. I don't think it's guaranteed that you always get good weapons. I'm pretty sure I've gotten green weapons out of there. But the supply drops are a lot of loot. So getting these in the mid game, I think definitely increases your chances of winning, mainly for the mobility and the utility you get. But also if you're coming off spawn, landing on a supply drop is often going to be your best bet if you're trying to regain in the match. And like I talked about before, you might need to give up on your POI early on in the game if fights are just kind of being a stalemate and not really going anywhere. And if supply drops have already spawned, landing on supply drops can work out pretty well. And even just like the kind of like the non-named areas in between POIs have a decent amount of loot in Reload because of that boosted loot spawn rate. So getting these supply drops and getting like a couple chests in an unnamed area, you can actually get a decent amount of loot pretty quickly. The way respawning works in Reload is players rift in, and they rift in near their teammates. So if you hear a rift very close to you, that means that player's teammate is near you as well. So you might be inclined to try to beam that person out of the sky, and I do it too for sure. But just keep in mind that person's teammate is near you, and they might have line of sight on you while you're just standing still trying to shoot their teammate out of the sky. So don't do so in the most like exposed area. And also, if you didn't know there was somebody in the area and you hear that rift nearby, that can be a clue to you that there's somebody close to you. And I think the rift is like directly above their teammate as well. I'm not 100% on that, but I think that's how it is. So that can give you a pretty good idea, not only that there's someone there, but maybe exactly where they are. And if you kill the healthy player, then the one that just came off respawn, like sure, they might land on a supply drop, they might land on some loot, but it's gonna be harder for that person to play the game. I think also one thing that a lot of people kind of miss out on in this game mode is how fast it is to revive. It's 5 seconds to revive an opponent, or a teammate, sorry. If one person is doing it, that's half of what it is in BR. So if you get some alone time in a fight, then you can revive pretty quickly. Especially in squads, when multiple people do it, you revive like pretty much instantly. And not only is this helpful for you to know, to like maybe take advantage of it and know that you could revive your teammate in situations where with the regular revive time you couldn't, you also need to keep this in mind with enemies. If you knock somebody, that person can get revived much faster than what you maybe anticipate. And that kind of comes back to what I was saying about you need to be decisive. If you get a knock and you want to push it, y'all need to do it like quick because they can get that person up very quickly. The final thing I want to touch on is that the end game of Reload slows down a lot. So there's 2 stages of Reload. There's the point where respawning is happening, and then eventually respawning stops and it plays out like a normal BR. And so if you get caught up in this very fast paced and you're still trying to play super fast when it's like no more respawning, you can get caught off guard sometimes because a lot of people start playing a lot slower, and that's kind of like the end game portion of the game, where, you know, people are playing slower, they're playing more safe, and if you do start getting a fight that's kind of a 50-50 for both teams, there's probably going to be another team that just pulls up and third parties you. So the end game portion of Reload, play it like how you would play end game in BR, and it slows down a lot, so just be prepared to deal with that like huge change in pace when players are no longer able to respawn. But that is going to be it for this video. I hope you guys found this helpful, informative, interesting. As always, if you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you would like to see more, and comment down below which of these mistakes you feel like has been costing you most, or if there's something that I didn't mention that you think is a super common mistake in Reload. Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.